The world measures a man by his title, judging the surface through cold metrics. But the machine only cares about the hand that holds the wrench. Inside the small, dim apartment on the industrial east side, dawn arrives not with light, but with a heavy, gray shadow pressing against frosted windows. The kitchen counter holds exactly 2 ceramic mugs, chipped at the edges. No photographs adorn the peeling wallpaper, only silence occupies the empty spaces. On the bookshelf, greasy technical manuals stand arranged with micro-precision. There are no novels here, no room for useless illusions or forgotten dreams. In the far corner, a quarter-folded piece of blueprint paper is pinned with a single thumbtack, its fine white lines holding a hidden geometry. 6-year-old Luna sits at the wooden table, her small fingers holding a worn brown teddy bear with a gear wheel sewn onto its chest. She has named the bear Cog, positioning it carefully against her orange juice glass as if it required a front-row seat to breakfast. Luna wears her starprint socks, a mismatched pair she claims contains the exact amount of luck required to survive a difficult Monday morning. Mason moves with silent efficiency, setting a metal lunchbox down on the counter without making a single sound against the worn linoleum floor. "Are you coming home early today?" Luna asks, her voice soft, eyes remaining fixed on the half-eaten toast between her tiny hands. Mason crouches down, his knees popping slightly in the quiet room. He looks at her with an absolute, unshakable devotion hidden behind tired eyes. He takes her loose shoelaces, pulling the dark cords taut with a highly specific tension, subconsciously calculating the exact friction coefficient of the knot. For a fraction of a second, his mind charts the mechanical stress of the fabric. Then he stops, blinking away the invisible data streams. "I'll try," he whispers, an honest acknowledgement of a volatile world rather than a shallow promise he cannot fully control. Luna nods slowly, accepting the answer with the profound, unruined trust of a child who has never been let down by her father. Vortex Motorsport occupied 4 sprawling city blocks, a monument of glass and polished steel worth over $2 billion. But Mason belonged only to level 2, a subterranean basement where the air felt thick with the bitter tang of stale machine oil. Above him, the heavy fabrication presses ran continuously, sending a low, rhythmic vibration directly through the cracked concrete floor beneath his boots. Experienced mechanics regularly demanded transfers away from this suffocating trench within 3 months, citing the lack of natural light. Mason never requested anything, accepting the heavy silence of the lower floor as a shield against a world he wished to forget. His colleagues called him the quiet guy on level 2, a ghost in grease-stained coveralls who spoke only when a machine was broken. Yet, Dominic, the veteran workshop foreman, watched him from the shadows with eyes that carried a heavy, unexpressed understanding. On a rusted steel workbench, Mason sorted standard-issue bolts by size and weight, his movements carrying a natural, unstudied fluid efficiency. Occasionally, his rough palm would flatten against the metal body of a vehicle, his eyes closing slowly to catch what instruments missed. He didn't just feel the vibration, his mind charted the microfrequencies of the cylinders, recognizing a familiar, ancient heartbeat within the steel. To the young engineers from the upper floors, he was entirely invisible, a disposable shadow cleaning up their expensive mistakes. The fragile piece shattered on a Monday morning when a sharp, high-frequency alarm pierced through the ventilation shafts from above. The proprietary GT7 racing engine, the crown jewel of Vortex's upcoming championship campaign, had died on the main test bed. For 11 consecutive days, 3 senior engineers had stared at the digital diagnostic screens, their advanced degrees proving entirely useless. The vehicle sat lifeless in the restricted bay like a heavy curse, with the biggest race of the year exactly 72 hours away. A $2 billion empire can be brought to its knees by a component no larger than a thumbnail, leaving power completely paralyzed. On the corporate 15th floor, the air felt sterile, frozen by the relentless white glare of high-end data projection screens. Evelyn Vance stood rigid against the sweeping panorama windows, watching storm clouds assemble over the distant industrial city skyline. Her fingers gripped her silver fountain pen with defensive intensity, the metal biting into her skin until her knuckles turned white. Across the polished mahogany boardroom table, Cameron sat with absolute composure, a calculating smile hidden behind smooth, measured words. The regulatory liability from the previous incident remains active, Cameron noted, his voice carrying a subtle, patronizing undertone of patience. He laid out a leather-bound folder containing millions in projected losses, presenting corporate failure as an unavoidable mathematical certainty. We either withdraw the entry or substitute the vehicle, he added, systematically forcing the young, inexperienced CEO into a corner. Evelyn stared at her father's empty chair at the head of the table, feeling the suffocating weight of an inherited crown. We do neither, she replied, her voice remaining soft but carrying the stubborn, unyielding cadence of the late founder. 15 floors beneath her boots, Mason sat on an overturned wooden crate, holding a plastic cup of coffee that had gone cold. The heated argument from the boardroom cascaded down through the uninsulated ventilation grate directly above his bent shoulders. He stared upward into the dark metallic grid, his eyes charting the invisible airflow with the calm certainty of a master architect. Tertiary pressure valve, secondary seal ring, Mason muttered quietly to the empty room, shaking his head at their collective ignorance. They have never read the original design drawing, he added, as the digital countdown clock on the wall pulsed silently toward zero. Midnight arrives, raping the small industrial apartment in a heavy, suffocating silence that rolls through the dark rooms. Luna sleeps soundly, her tiny hand still clutching the stuffed bear, Cog, beneath a faded cotton blanket. In the kitchen, a single overhead bulb casts a weak amber pool over the scratched wooden table. Mason sits motionless, staring at a blank cardboard page at the back of his daughter's favorite picture book. His rough hand grips an old, unpolished wooden pencil, his knuckles casting long shadows across the table surface. Without warning, his hand begins to move, sweeping across the paper with the blinding speed of absolute mechanical certainty. He does not use a ruler, yet every stroke emerges with the flawless mathematical precision of a master draft. White graphite dust accumulates on the edges of his calloused thumb as the intricate engineering layout begins to take shape. The pencil charts the complex channels of the tertiary valve, recreating an architecture the corporate world deemed entirely impossible. Long-suppressed memories of high-stakes testing tracks flicker behind his eyes, but his expression remains rigidly disciplined, completely unreadable. Hard lines are rendered with absolute confidence, a silent testament to a genius buried beneath layers of forced obscurity. In the lower corner of the paper, he marks two distinct, precise initials, matching the hidden mark on the wall. The finished diagram stands flawless, holding the key to a multi-million-dollar machine within the margins of a child's toy. Mason sets the worn pencil down, the soft click echoing through the empty kitchen like a definitive mechanical lock. He closes the picture book gently, his eyes tracking the ticking wall clock as time systematically runs out for Vortex. At 2 a.m, the outer perimeter of Vortex Motorsport stands submerged in a cold, unyielding wall of industrial dark. Mason steps through the secondary employee entrance, his boots leaving faint, damp tracks on the polished granite floors of the lobby. His standard-issue maintenance card slides into the digital reader, the small electronic mechanism unlocking gates the system never meant for him. The upper engineering bay is entirely hollow at this hour, a vast metallic cavern holding silent machinery worth untold fortunes. Strips of bright yellow caution tape stretch across the bay entrance, the bold black letters reading restricted area authorized engineers only. Without a single moment of hesitation, Mason steps over the plastic barrier, breaking the corporate boundary with absolute physical certainty. The dead GT-7 prototype sits directly in the center of the dark bay, looking like an abandoned iron monument under shadows. The cold air within the massive room carries the sharp, biting scent of high-grade synthetic coolant and unrefined fuel vapors. He sets his battered plastic toolbox down on the clean floor, the muffled sound absorbed completely by the surrounding concrete space. He clicks on a single heavy industrial flashlight, casting a sharp, narrow beam of white light across the matte black chassis. The bright illumination catches the fine textures of carbon fiber, exposing every micro-scratch left by previous failed diagnostic interventions. Mason unclips the heavy metallic fasteners of his old toolkit, the sharp zinc snaps echoing loudly against the high metal ceilings. His rough, calloused fingers select a standard analog socket wrench, bypassing the digital diagnostic computers standing uselessly in the corners. He approaches the exposed engine bay, his body casting a massive, looming silhouette against the high-tech white walls behind him. The cold iron wrench touches the primary outer casing bolt, ready to dismantle a multi-million-dollar failure from the ground up. Mason works from memory, not the uncertain recollection of a technician following steps, but the absolute clarity of the original designer. The chrome casing screws come apart beneath his heavy wrench, spinning free in a sequence completely omitted from modern maintenance logs. He gently lifts the secondary titanium cover, exposing the complex labyrinth of dark fuel lines that feed the engine's internal chambers. Every movement of his scarred fingers carries a strange, fluid grace, a silent rhythm that makes the heavy steel feel almost fragile. Droplets of dark synthetic oil smear across his palms, but he does not pause, tracking the technical grid with absolute tactical focus. The digital computers in the background continue to flash their useless red errors, entirely blind to the mechanical truth unfolding beneath them. Mason reaches deeper into the narrow housing valley, his long forceps bypassing the outer sensors to touch the hidden tertiary valve. The aluminum housing separates with a muffled metallic sigh, revealing the structural core that 3 teams of experts failed to diagnose. Nestled within the dark metallic groove sits a microcomponent, a tiny rubber ring designed to isolate extreme structural pressure streams. Under the sharp beam of his industrial flashlight, the small seal shows a jagged, microscopic tear splitting across its delicate edge. This specific ring does not exist on any digital parts inventory manifest because Mason had added it manually during development. A decade ago, he slipped this silent safeguard into the first physical prototype, intending to formalize the documentation before his world broke. Later had never arrived for him, leaving the modified blueprint buried deep within his mind while the company copied the surface. He holds the broken rubber ring against the white light, his sharp eyes examining the structural failure with a quiet, solemn understanding. The engine's silent mystery stands entirely exposed, stripped bare by a single man working in the deep shadows of the night. From the deep pocket of his faded canvas shirt, Mason pulls a small, clear plastic case containing a single pristine component. Inside lies a cross-referenced secondary seal ring, a mechanical safeguard he carried through a decade of cold, silent wandering. His oil-stained fingers position the fresh rubber ring into the machine's cylinder groove, fitting it with unhurried structural alignment. The raw aluminum housing blocks slide back together, locking into place with a definitive, high-pressure mechanical snap that seats perfectly. Mason reverses his wrench sequence, torque tightening each primary casing bolt to the exact physical stress thresholds written only in his mind. The heavy braided fuel delivery lines slide back onto their titanium rails, closing the exposed labyrinth of the complex machine. Outside the high glass windows of the compound, the heavy night dark slowly thins into a pale, gray horizon dawn. At exactly 3 minutes before 7 in the morning, Mason steps up to the manual control station mounted directly on the wall. Bypassing the frozen computer diagnostic monitors, his scarred hand clamps firmly onto the old analog iron ignition toggle switch. He throws the heavy switch forward, sending a sudden, raw electric current pulsing through the cold titanium core of the car. The GT7 engine turns over once, catches the spark, and immediately explodes into a massive, thunderous, perfectly synchronized mechanical roar. The idle settles into a smooth, Gyeongjia harmonic song, the fuel delivery variance needles freezing at an impossible 0.01. The old analog pressure gauges on the wall register nominal operation parameters, vibrating gently under the engine's intense kinetic output. Mason wipes his black, grease-smeared hands on a rough shop rag, his expression remaining entirely calm, devoid of shallow pride. He packs his old toolkit, stepping back over the yellow caution tape as he retreats into the shadows of Level 2. Dominic finds him tucked in the dim corner of Level 2 at 7:15, as the morning shift workers begin to filter into the facility. The veteran workshop foreman stands silent, his thick boots coated in dust, looking at Mason with an unreadably heavy, solemn expression. He looks across the empty lower floor, then back at the quiet mechanic who has already resumed his regular issue maintenance tasks. Mason meets his steady gaze without speaking, a faint micronod passing between the two men like an ancient structural alignment sequence. Dominic extends his massive, calloused hand, wrapping his rough fingers around Mason's palm in a solid, uncelebrated grip of absolute validation. No words are spoken in the shadow of the concrete pillar, yet the heavy silence holds more history than any formal document. Upstairs in the restricted engineering bay, the morning sun cuts sharp white beams across the newly functional body of the GT-7. Isaac runs the comprehensive software diagnostic suite at exactly 7:30, his thin metal glasses reflecting rapid lines of fresh telemetry. He stands frozen for a long, breathless minute, staring at the main display screen as the final computation logs finish loading. The complex fuel delivery variance indicator hovers perfectly at 0.01%, lower than the original factory specification guidelines. It is a mathematical perfection that the current version of the digital system identified only hours before as a total impossibility. Isaac frantically gestures for two members of his team to cross the floor, pointing a trembling finger at the glowing panel. The young engineers crowd around the workstation console, their arrogant expressions instantly morphing into a state of severe, unresolvable shock. They verify the physical pressure lines and find no leaks, staring at each other in the heavy, absolute silence of failure. Nobody knows what to say, completely unaware that a phantom mechanic had dismantled and saved their multi-million-dollar asset in the dark. While the workshop celebrates an unexplainable miracle, corporate shadows gather on the high executive floors where ambition overrules reality. Cameron stands inside the dark security surveillance suite, the frozen mountain of digital monitoring consoles glowing with a cold amber hue. His long, tailored fingers glide across a glass touchpad, rewinding the encrypted midnight playback logs of the primary hypercar bay. The high-resolution infrared screen flickers, exposing the unmistakable grainy monochrome silhouette of a lone worker stepping over the restricted line. Cameron zooms into the thermal display, tracking the micro-movements of the calloused hands as they effortlessly manipulated the engine core. A sharp, icy flash of recognition cuts through his narrow pupils as he identifies the silent mechanic from Level 2. He doesn't look at the flawless diagnostic charts, he only sees a severe threat to a decade of carefully constructed lies. 10 years ago, Cameron had systematically erased Mason's name from the original blueprints, claiming the brilliant design as a corporate asset. Now, the living ghost of that stolen design had returned, threatening to shatter his entire career with a single wrench. His jaw locks into a hard, rigid line, his mind instantly constructing a flawless tactical counterstrike based on strict company protocols. He opens a secure legal database template, his hands typing a formal termination document with cold, unhurried mechanical precision. The text blocks outline a critical safety exposure liability, intentionally framing a technical salvation as an act of unauthorized industrial sabotage. The digital cursor pulses aggressively against the cold white screen surface, a silent executioner waiting to seal a man's fate. Cameron prints the formal notice, the dry mechanical hum of the machine echoing through the sterile room like a heavy lock closing. He slips the paper folder under his arm, walking toward the executive elevator to deliver a definitive, unyielding blow to the foundation. The executive elevator doors open onto the 15th floor, a world where reality is filtered through high-end glass and silent corporate authority. Mason stands in the center of the vast office, his faded canvas maintenance coveralls carrying the sharp, heavy scent of basement machine oil. His rugged leather boots leave microscopic grain tracks on the white marble floor, an unpolished anomaly inside a sterile, flawless empire. Across the room, a large victory photograph from 10 years ago hangs mounted on the wall, its corner holding two faded initials. Mason's deep-set eyes glance briefly at the framed memory, his expression remaining rigidly disciplined, completely unreadable to the people surrounding him. Evelyn sits behind her massive mahogany desk, her defensive posture framed by the gray storm light rolling outside the panorama windows. Cameron steps forward with smooth, calculated aggression, slamming the leather-bound security breach file onto the polished wood surface between them. An unauthorized low-level employee performance intervention on our primary asset, Cameron notes, his voice carrying a concise, patronizing undertone. He presents the frozen infrared surveillance prints as absolute proof of industrial sabotage, systematically weaponizing company protocol to eliminate a threat. Do you hold a single active engineering certification relevant to this complex multi-million-dollar system? Cameron asks, cornering the silent worker. Mason does not look at the predatory COO, his steady, unblinking gaze remains locked directly on the eyes of the young CEO. The heavy silence inside the office thickens, the subtle electronic hum of the climate control system heightening the psychological pressure. Evelyn watches the oil stains on Mason's sleeves, her initial confidence wavering under the heavy weight of an unexplained mechanical reality. You bypassed 3 layers of restricted security access arrays in the middle of the night, she notes, her voice trembling slightly. Mason remains perfectly still against the cold glare, a living monument of uncelebrated genius waiting for the corporate system to speak. The question does not carry an angry tone, remaining completely devoid of defiance or petty rebellion inside the Grand Executive Office. It stands as the most direct translation of a raw, unpolished reality, stripping away layers of corporate jargon and dynamic metrics. His voice stays low and steady, a calm baritone resonance that cuts through the artificial coldness of the 15th floor. Do you want the car to run? He asks, his dark eyes locking onto Evelyn with absolute, unyielding intensity. Or do you want the paperwork to be correct? He adds, forcing an immediate, brutal choice upon the young, inexperienced CEO. The direct inquiry hangs heavily in the sterile air between them, a sudden mechanical dead weight nobody can easily bypass. Cameron's expression hardens instantly, a flash of malicious corporate fury cutting through his carefully masked, smooth executive composure. His long fingers tighten against his tailored trousers, his body language turning defensive as the psychological balance begins to shift away. Evelyn looks down at her expensive dark mahogany desk, her eyes scanning the blank corners as she searches for an answer. To answer honestly would require her to dismantle the very regulatory infrastructure she has spent months desperately hiding behind for safety. She sees the sharp reflection of her father's vacant high-back chair inside the polished wood grain, a silent ghost watching her path. She realizes that her father had never managed the empire through sterile paperwork, but through the living heartbeat of the machines. Yet, the legal warnings from the Legal Compliance Committee ring loudly inside her mind, paralyzing her ability to speak immediately. Cameron leans closer to her ear, his low voice a manipulative whisper pointing directly at the signed corporate termination papers. The ticking wall clock beats like a heavy iron pulse, marking the exact moment a legacy is weighed against system protocol. Under the unyielding weight of dynamic compliance, paper becomes a Tan-Nan weapon designed to crush the gray reality of raw genius. Evelyn's fingers tremble slightly as she positions the steel fountain pen over the definitive line of the termination document. She signs the corporate notice, the wet ink cutting across the textured paper fibers like a cold, irreversible physical sentence. Cameron instantly reclaims the folder, a sharp, triumphant smile flashes behind his cold eyes as he seals the internal threat. Mason accepts the corporate fan quiet without a single word of protest, his expression remaining perfectly steady, ironclad and completely stoic. He reaches down slowly, his calloused fingers buckling the heavy metallic latches of his faded plastic toolbox with deliberate precision. Standing tall against the sterile glass walls, he begins to button the top CUC of his gray canvas maintenance shirt. The slow, Unhurried physical action carries the deep dignity of a true craftsman who owes nothing to a broken system. He hoists the heavy toolbox by its scratched handle, the steel frames casting long, dominant shadows across the white marble floor. He turns his back on the executive desk, walking toward the large glass doors with a steady, unyielding mechanical stride. At the boundary of the threshold, Mason pauses for a brief fraction of a second, his wide shoulders freezing in shadow. He does not look back, his low, warm baritone voice carrying a suggestion that cuts through the quiet room. Before you run the car this weekend, you should read the original design drawings for the GT7, Mason whispers calmly. The original, if the company still has them, he added, as the glass doors slide closed behind his departing figure. Evelyn stands motionless, the cryptic warning echoing through her mind like a heavy structural gear failing deep inside the machine. The corporate storm recedes as the heavy metal gates of Vortex Motorsport close, returning a quiet dignity to the forgotten craftsman. Mason walks through the rainy afternoon streets, his heavy mechanic toolbox creating a slow, rhythmic clank against his dark uniform. He unlocks the door to the neighbor's apartment, finding Luna sitting at the kitchen table beneath a single amber light ray. "You are early today," Luna says, her young eyes widening with immediate, unexpected delight as she looks up from her drawing. Mason sets his heavy plastic toolkit down by the entrance, the dead sound absorbed completely by the worn fabric carpet. He approaches the small wooden kitchen table, slowly crouching down until his eyes are positioned perfectly level with his daughter's. His rough, oil-stained hands gently frame her small shoulders, his tired features softening into a look of absolute, unshakable devotion. "I do not have work at the big facility anymore," he whispers calmly, presenting structural failure as a quiet new beginning. Luna looks at him without a single trace of fear, her small fingers tightening around her worn brown teddy bear, Cog. "Will the new place have cars?" she asks softly, her pure innocence mapping a future completely untouched by corporate malice. Mason permits a faint, rare smile to touch his lips, his voice carrying a warmth that cuts through the apartment's chill. "Every place has cars," he promises, sealing a gentle, unruined trust that no formal termination notice could ever hope to break. Hours later, after the reading is finished and Luna falls asleep, Mason sits alone at the bare wooden kitchen table. He lifts his old mobile phone, deliberately dialing a private number he had deleted from his text memory days before. "I knew you would call eventually," Dominic's low voice echoes through the receiver, followed by a pause. "The car told on you." The checkered flag drops in a blur of velocity, sealing a victory that historical records will celebrate with golden text. Vortex Motorsport secures the second-place podium finish, a monumental triumph that instantly re-establishes the late founder's multi-billion-dollar racing lineage. The pit lane explodes into an immediate, deafening roar of human celebration as mechanics and executives embrace under the floodlights. High-pressure champagne bottles pop open, casting a white, effervescent mist that rains down heavily across the polished asphalt ground. Blinding camera flashes pulse continuously against the dark garage bays, illuminating a synthetic paradise built on unyielding media projection. Cameron stands at the center of the press circle, his smooth bespoke suit absorbing the shallow adulation of international journalists. He presents corporate aggregated engineering statistics to the crowd, systematically collecting credit for a masterpiece he could never hope to build. Her fingers rest lightly against the cold metal of her phone, her tensed posture cutting a solitary silhouette inside the light. The vibrant cheers of the crowd dissolve into a hollow, indistinct background drone inside her tensed, exhausted mind. She looks down at the newly functional GT7 prototype car, its hot carbon fiber panels radiating a heavy wave of kinetic heat. The cooling racing engine ticks rhythmically in the quiet bay, its metal components contracting with a distinct, metallic structural melody. It sings a pure, unpolished mechanical dialect, a raw harmonic sequence that carries more history than the trophy itself can hold. Evelyn realizes the car is speaking a language she was raised alongside but never formally taught by her father's empire. A profound, unresolvable Hong-Mang settles over her features as the hollow echo of Mason's parting words changes her reality forever. Monday morning arrives with a heavy, gray light filtering through the dirty glass window structures of the lower basement workshop. Evelyn steps onto the stained concrete floor of level 2, her elegant leather dress shoes marking a stark, unpolished boundary line. Dominic sits alone on an overturned wooden crate, slowly chewing his sandwich while watching the empty service bays with still intensity. "Did you know who he really was?" Evelyn asks, her voice cutting through the heavy, oil-scented air with sharp urgency. The veteran foreman sets his food down deliberately onto its wrinkled paper wrapper, choosing to end a decade of enforced silence. "I knew from his second day here," Dominic replies, his weathered features hardening into an expression of deep, solemn truth. 10 years ago, your father hired a 21-year-old with no university degree and a paper napkin full of sketches, he notes. His name was Mason Cole, the foreman adds, delivering a precise technical identity that instantly shatters the corporate system's fabrications. Dominic reaches into his old leather wallet, pulling out a creased, handled paper sheet containing an intricate pressure distribution diagram. The fine graphite notations in the lower corner carry the exact handwritten initials that Evelyn saw inside the victory photograph. He designed 7 engine variants in 3 years, and the GT7 was the final masterpiece before his world broke, Dominic whispers. He explains the sudden road accident that took Mason's wife, leaving the young designer alone with a newborn baby girl, Luna. He left everything on his desk and walked out during the company's chaotic executive transition, the foreman notes. By the time the handover records were organized, those original blueprints were entirely gone, Dominic adds, looking up into shadow. Evelyn listens in absolute, frozen shock, the dark implication pointing directly toward Cameron's pristine suite at the top of the empire. Evelyn leaves the lower workshop immediately, her mind spinning as she approaches the heavy steel door of the third-floor archive room. The silent vault remains untouched by modern digital upgrades, holding decades of unpolished corporate paper history inside dark metal rows. Thick layers of stagnant gray dust coat the steel filing cabinets, drifting quietly through a single narrow beam of pale daylight. She approaches her late father's personal secure locker, her tensed fingers hovering over the cold, mechanical combination dial lock. Evelyn enters her mother's birthday sequence with deliberate pacing, the small analog brass gears clicking heavily inside the lock mechanism. The heavy steel latch releases with a dull, echoing metallic thud that shatters the suffocating silence of the forgotten room. She slides the bottom drawer open smoothly, the ungreased steel guide rails emitting a long, dry screech against the concrete. Rested beneath a mountain of obsolete manufacturing contracts lies a thick cardboard envelope sealed with yellowed, heavily decayed adhesive tape. Her tense thumb peels the brittle adhesive back slowly, the textured paper tearing faintly as she uncovers a hidden legacy. Inside lies a single folded page covered in clear, direct handwriting, entirely devoid of shallow flourish or corporate marketing jargon. The technical lines outline a desperate plea to keep the GT7 hypercar safe, signed with the exact handwritten initials, MC. Evelyn places the handwritten original blueprint side by side with the current engineering files, exposing a catastrophic structural deficit layout. 3 generations of elite university graduates had systematically copied a simplified blueprint layout, completely blind to the foundational document underneath. Cameron had deliberately intercepted the document a decade ago, stealing a masterpiece to secure his high corporate advancement path. The fragile white paper sheet trembles inside her tensed grip, a historical fraud fully unmasked beneath a single bare light bulb. Justice does not arrive with a loud explosion, but with the quiet, devastating placement of unyielding truth upon a corporate desk. Evelyn Vance stands motionless at the high panoramic windows, her tensed shadow stretching across the empty executive boardroom. Cameron steps inside the room with unhurried arrogance, his expensive leather dress shoes striking the floor tiles with cold, rigid impact. He stops abruptly as his calculating eyes settle upon three distinct historical items arranged in perfect alignment over the mahogany wood. The first item is the original handwritten GT7 engineering layout, its lower margin block showing Mason's sharp, clear signature mark. The second is a printed chain of internal correspondence from a decade ago, systematically exposing a calculated corporate tuak dot scheme. The third is a weathered, deeply creased paper napkin, its charcoal lines holding the primary load distribution geometry of the empire. Dominic had preserved this fragile artifact inside his leather wallet for 10 consecutive years, a silent testament waiting for retribution. The international licensing distribution agreement with the German automotive group is officially terminated, Evelyn whispers with icy, unyielding precision. Her voice does not rise, settling heavily into the room like her late father's definitive, unresolvable final execution notices. We do not own the intellectual property rights because the actual authorship assignment was never formally assigned, she adds. Cameron's smooth executive composure fractures violently, a sudden pale sweat breaking across his tense jaw lines under the cold light. He attempts to construct a manipulative regulatory defense, his voice trembling as his carefully designed infrastructure completely collapses. You have exactly 48 hours to clear your administrative workspace in coordination with our primary legal counsel, Evelyn commands. Cameron turns slowly toward the exit threshold, his arrogant posture crushed completely beneath the absolute weight of a paper napkin. The corporate mechanism does not mourn the departure of an executive, closing its seamless glass boundaries without a single acoustic trace. Cameron walks down the long, empty corridor of the 15th floor, his slouched silhouette fading slowly into the cold background shadow. His expensive leather dress shoes strike the floor with a hollow, rhythmic cadence, marking the final exit of a fallen opportunist. The polished chrome elevator doors slide open silently, absorbing his defeated figure before dropping into the deep dark of the shaft. Back inside the vast office, Evelyn sits lone at her father's mahogany desk, surrounded by the heavy silence of an inherited empire. Her pale fingers gently unfold the yellowed cardboard envelope pulled from the vault, revealing the late founder's handwritten personal records. Inside lies a final private memorandum, the elegant cursive lines written in a faint, micro-trembling hand near the end of his life. The old blue ink smudges slightly against the coarse paper fiber, a silent physical record of a man running out of time. The difference between a good car and a great car is not found in the metal layout, the text block outlines clearly. It resides entirely in whether the master craftsman was listening when they built the machine from the foundation up, she reads. Evelyn tracks the ancient technical notation, realizing her father had spent his final months carrying a heavy burden of unspoken regret. A single, clear drop of moisture falls silently from her eyelid, striking the dry paper margin like a soft mechanical impact point. The fluid droplet expands across the white surface, blurring a technical boundary line drawn by an invisible tie a decade ago. She closes her eyes slowly, finally understanding the profound human legacy buried deep underneath the sterile paperwork of the multi-billion-dollar corporation. The hot engine idle of the GT7 continues to hum far below her boots, a living heartbeat waiting for its true creator. True authority does not hide behind monolithic corporate towers, but humbles itself to locate the foundation where the genius resides. Evelyn drives through the decaying industrial tracks, gray rain washing over the cracked concrete warehouses of the forgotten East Side. She stops outside the worn residential block, her tensed footsteps echoing softly up the dark, unpolished concrete stairwell corridors. Through the narrow crack of a half-open wooden door, a single pool of warm amber light illuminates a silent reality. Mason Cole sits cross-legged on the linoleum floor, completely detached from the high corporate turmoil of the outside world. His massive, calloused hands guide a miniature jeweler's screwdriver, applying micro-precision to the plastic chassis of a $5 toy car. He fixes a broken rear axle alignment for Luna with the exact same focus he gave to the $2 billion GT7 engine core. Evelyn steps inside the small, humble kitchen, her tensed posture cutting a quiet silhouette against the peeling vintage wallpaper. She deliberately places the yellowed envelope upon the scratched wooden table, releasing her late father's unanswered letter between them. "I am sorry for not asking the right questions when I had the authority," she notes, her voice carrying a deep, sincere apology. She slides a fresh leather folder across the table surface, the gold-embossed text reading Chief Design Engineer Positioning a New Legacy. Mason looks down at the formal document block, his dark eyes reading the compliance clauses with unhurried, mechanical scrutiny. He lifts an old steel fountain pen from his pocket, his rough knuckles casting a long, disciplined shadow footprint over the paper. With absolute certainty, his hand sketches two distinct block initials, MC, locking his original signature onto the definitive contract line. The uncelebrated craftsman seals his return to the foundation, ready to restore the proper alignment of the entire engineering empire. True restoration does not occur in secret, but steps boldly through the grand entrance under the clean, unyielding light of a new dawn. Mason walks through the towering glass atrium of Vortex Motorsport, his long tensed shadow cutting across the polished white travertine floors. Clipped firmly to his dark uniform canvas chest is a sharp new security badge, the crisp black letters reading Chief Design Engineer. The receptionist nods with genuine, unforced respect, addressing the returning master by his true family name for the first time in a decade. Down in the primary engineering salon, the heavy blinds lift slowly, letting a flood of brilliant morning golden hour sun stream across the floor. Isaac approaches the center assembly bay with total fluid urgency, carrying a thick binder of technical queries from his senior staff. Mason unrolls his original handwritten layout sketches upon the aluminum test bench, the raw graphite marks catching the clean side light. The young, recently arrogant engineers gather around the dark wood perimeter, their postures tensed with a fresh, insatiable hunger for real tri-took. No digital tablets clutter the workspace layout, only the pure architecture of mathematical curves and foundational mechanical logic remains visible. Mason points a scarred, grease-stained thumb to the secondary seal ring housing, explaining the silent safeguard that saved the team's asset. High on the 15th floor, Evelyn Vance stands peacefully by her glass office windows, looking down at the thriving workshop layout far below. A soft, unforced smile touches her facial features, her defensive corporate armor fully dissolved into an unshakable state of calm fulfillment. Inside the bay, Isaac throws the analog manual breaker forward, sending a sudden raw current pulsing into the heart of the hypercar. The GT7 block explodes into an immediate, thunderous V8 racing gam-vang roar, the idle settling into a flawless harmonic song of steel.